quotes him in his article and notes that Beletsky has, quote, pledged to restore the honor of the white race. And he's also proposed laws forbidding so-called race mixing. But before we conclude here, Max, I'm wondering if you could briefly talk about why you weren't surprised to hear that Israel today is arming Nazis in Ukraine, given its history.
Well, because of what you just explained, which is Israel's history of working as a kind of proxy for the U.S. to arm forces that are committing human rights abuses or that are fascistic, and to give the U.S. some kind of distance during the 1980s. I think it was in '84, in one of the rare periods where there was intelligence reform and Congress actually.
This is how Chancellor Angela Merkel was greeted at her party campaign meeting in Berlin, and the event organized by her Christian Democratic Union was disrupted by protesters angry at their country's stance in Ukraine's conflict. Demonstrators booed the chancellor and brandished banners demanding the arrest of Nazis in Ukraine and called for stronger ties with Russia.
I don't like our government getting involved in the affairs of other people and leading only to trouble. I have followed the admonition of our early founders of the country that we shouldn't be involved in the entangling alliances throughout the world, nor in the internal affairs of other nations. So whether it's the Middle East, Northern Africa, or whether it's Ukraine.
The first settlements in Palestine in the early 1800s were not set up by Jews. The German Templars were part of the Christian Zionism movement, whereby the European powers sought to establish their presence in the Holy Land after 1840. These adherents of the German Lutheran Church established settlements in Jerusalem, Haifa, Galilee, and what is now Tel Aviv, serving as a model for the Jewish pioneers who came much later, after the German Templars already established colonies, roads, infrastructure, and agriculture in the Holy Land. In the 1930s, many of the Templars in Palestine, named after the Temple of Solomon, joined the Nazi Party, and despite modern propaganda, their influence was acknowledged at the time, as was Hitler's role in working with Jewish Zionists to populate what became modern Israel. Quote, Jews from Germany have reinforced the economic growth they found in progress. Some of the earlier arrivals brought considerable means. Their investments have given a powerful impetus to the industries of the new Palestine. Boys and girls of urban families prepared themselves for the land, joining or founding colonies. Hitler made Haifa, runs a Jewish proverb. German Jews are helping to develop there a great industrial center for the Near East. Hitler didn't want to exterminate the Jews at the time. He wanted to expel the Jews. Nothing exists showing that Hitler ordered the extermination. There's no Hitler letter, which is a smoking gun. And Trennung, the complete removal or the deliberate removal of the Jews. Live on Channel Bird. This is the 10 o'clock news with Deborah Norville. Coming out revealing secret negotiation between the Nazis and the Zionists in 1933, which allowed German Jews and their assets to go to Palestine. Deborah, with the rise of Adolf Hitler to power in the spring of 1933, the Jews of the world were faced with a dilemma. They could raise a cry of protest, a cry few would heed, or they could make a deal with Hitler. A deal that would bring a step closer to their dream of an independent Jewish state. American Jews marched calling for the boycott of all German exports. Jews throughout Europe echoed that call. So did Jews everywhere. But a group of Zionists at the same time was quietly negotiating an agreement with the Nazis to allow the immigration of German Jews and the transfer of their assets to Palestine. That deal, reported in August 1933, was the transfer agreement. Palestine, sparsely settled by Jews at the time, was radically changed as a result. I lived in Palestine from 1933 to 1936, and we saw every week transports of German Jews coming to settle in Palestine. German Jewish settlement of Palestine was, for a time, official Nazi policy. These photos of Jewish life in Palestine, along with a lengthy text, appeared in 1934 in the Berlin paper Der Angriff. A Nazi Visits Palestine was the title of the multi-part series. A medal was struck by Goebbels in commemoration. On one side the swastika, on the other the Star of David. While the German National Socialist government had a working relationship with the sect of Zionist Jews, they were simultaneously hostile to a primarily secular Jewish movement, which has some post-World War II historians confused, especially those that perceived the Jewish people as a homogeneous, politically monolithic demographic, which they are not. In a 1920 article written by Prime Minister Winston Churchill, titled Zionism versus Bolshevism, A Struggle for the Soul of the Jewish People, Churchill starts off by praising the Jewish people's contribution to Western civilization. He then goes on to describe what he calls international Jews as having, quote, most, if not all, of them have forsaken the faith of their forefathers, and divorced from their mind all spiritual hopes of the next world. This movement amongst the Jews is not new. From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx and down to Trotsky, Bela Kun, Rosa Luxemburg, and Emma Goldman, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development, of envious malevolence, and impossible equality has been steadily growing. It played a definitely recognizable part in the tragedy of the French Revolution. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century, and now at last this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads and have become practically and undisputed masters of the enormous empire. There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism and in the actual bringing about of the Russian Revolution by these international and for the most part atheistical Jews. It is certainly a very great one. It probably outweighs all others. With the notable exception of Lenin, the majority of the leading figures are Jews. Moreover, the principal inspiration and driving power comes from the Jewish leaders. In violent contrast to international communism, Zionism presents to the Jew a national idea of commanding character. It has fallen to the British government as a result of the conquest of Palestine to have the opportunity and responsibility of securing for the Jewish race all over the world a home and center of national life. Zionism has already become a factor in political convulsions of Russia as a powerful competing influence in Bolshevik circles with the international communistic system. Nothing could be more significant than the fury with which Trotsky has attacked the Zionists. The cruel penetration of his mind leaves him in no doubt that his schemes of a worldwide communistic state under the Jewish domination are directly thwarted and hindered by this new ideal, which directs the energies and the hopes of Jews in every land towards a simpler, a truer, and a far more attainable goal. The struggle which is now beginning between the Zionists and Bolshevik Jews is little less than a struggle for the soul of the Jewish people. It is particularly important in these circumstances that the national Jews in every country who are loyal to the land of their adoption should come forward on every occasion, as many of them in England have already done, and take a prominent part in every measure for combating the Bolshevik conspiracy. In this way, they will be able to vindicate the honor of the Jewish name and make it clear to all the world that the Bolshevik movement is not a Jewish movement, but is repudiated vehemently by the great mass of the Jewish people.